What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. Today, I'll be ranking where every NASCAR Cup Series driver will finish in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026. I'm going to go through 36 to number 1. So anyways, let's go ahead and just jump straight into it. The driver at finishing 36 in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is the driver in the 51 car for Rick Ware Racing, Cody Ware. Cody Ware will be back behind the wheel of this car in 2026. Look, I think of all the drivers in the NASCAR Cup Series field, I think Cody Ware is probably the weakest link in this field. Yes, his team will be switching manufacturers from Ford to Chevrolet and getting support from ECR and RCR going into next year, but I just don't expect much. Cody Ware was one of two drivers in 2025 that failed to score even a single top 10 finish, and Cody Ware finished last in his standings, and most of the year outside of super speedways, he didn't run very, very well. I think his best chance to run really good is going to be at the super speedways this upcoming year, but I don't expect much from Cody Ware. Sadly, I think he's going to show quite a bit. I don't think he runs really well and has a lot of bad and not good runs in 2026 at RWR. The driver at finishing 35th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is the driver to 10 car for Kaulig Racing, Ty Dillon. Ty Dillon will be back behind the wheel of the number 10 car in 2026 after rumors speculation stating he wasn't even going to be full-time. Now, 2025 for Ty Dillon was not really a great season. Sure, he had a good chance and opportunity to win the in-season challenge this year, and he had a good shot to do it, but outside of that, didn't have a lot of really good runs. And especially with Kaulig no longer having support from ECR and RCR going into 2026, I think unfortunately for Ty Dillon, he is going to regress this upcoming year. I don't expect performance to be really strong for Ty Dillon. I think there's going to be a lot of times where he's running outside of top 20 and top 25. He might get an occasional top 10 or a couple top 10s, but I'm not expecting much from Ty Dillon. I think it's going to be a struggle, and I think this 10 car will be one of the lowest teams and will not have a great season in Cup competition in 2026. The driver at finishing 34th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver 35 car for 2311 Racing, Riley Herbst. Riley Herbst will be back behind the wheel of the number 35 car this upcoming season. 2025 was a really disappointing season for Riley Herbst. You can argue he had one of the worst rookie seasons we have ever seen in NASCAR Cup history. He is the other of the two drivers who failed to score a single top 10 finish and had the worst best finisher drivers of full-time guys in 2026 with a 14th place finish, I think, earlier in the year. And I really don't expect much to improvement from Riley Herbst. Now, I think very likely Riley Herbst will actually finally get that first top 10 as a full-time driver, but he just really isn't going to do much in this car, unfortunately. His teammates, Bubba Wallace and Ty Reddick, I expect to be way better than him this year. It wouldn't surprise me if he's out of the seat after 2026 is because his performance, I just don't think it's going to be good. I think it's going to be a struggle for Riley. Sadly, I don't think he'll run really well this year in 2026. The driver finishing 33rd in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver of the 4 car for Farmer Motorsports, Noah Gragson. 2025 was a pretty big struggle for Noah Gragson. Noah Gragson, I think, had maybe 2 or 3 top 10s across the board and finished in the bottom half of the field. And I do expect that to continue quite a bit in 2026, which is shocking considering him and Drew Blick there for a couple years ago at SHR. They both worked together very well, had like 8 or 9 top 10s in 2024. But I don't think things are going to get much better. Now, I think his luck is going to be a lot better, but I just don't expect performance to improve quite a bit this season, unfortunately. I think Noah's going to be running in the middle of the back of pack quite a bit this year. I think Noah's a talented driver. I just don't think that 4 car was ready at this point. I think it's going to be a struggle, unfortunately, for Noah, and sadly, I think the runs will not be good for Noah in the 2026 year. The driver finishing 32nd in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver of the 41 car for the Haas factory team, Cole Custer. Cole Custer will be back with his program next year, and there's big changes coming to his program next year as they are switching from Fords to Chevrolets for the Cup and O'Reilly Auto Parts Series programs next year. Cole Custer, I think, is an alright driver, but the Haas factory team, they don't have massive support. Yes, they are going to be getting Hendrick engines, but they're going to be the 3rd or 4th team at Hendrick at best. They're going to be pretty much getting the same stuff that Hayek Motorsports gets, unless that team has really struggled as well. I think it's going to be a struggle for Custer to be a major factor. Now, I could see Custer being an underdog at super speedways in 2026. And maybe getting a couple top 10s throughout the year. But I don't expect this team to have a lot of really good runs. They struggled at qualifying in 2025, and that was one of the big Achilles heels. So I think it's going to be a struggle for Custer, and I think he's going to be finishing the bottom of the standings in 2026. The driver finishing 31st in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver of the 3 car for Richard Childress Racing, Austin Dillon. Yes, I think Austin Dillon is going to have a worse season in 2026 than he had in 2025. I do think Austin Dillon is a better driver than people give him credit for, but Austin Dillon, I think, is really just not going to be there this year. The performance just hasn't really seemed to be there in the last couple years for Austin Dillon. They brought Richard Boswell in, and granted, he did improve in 2025 compared to 24, but that's not really saying much. I don't think he's going to get that win at Richmond like he had in 2024, 2025, so I think that's going to be one race where we'll have a chance to have a great run, and I just don't expect this 3 team to have a ton of pace and a ton of speed. So because of that, I think it's going to be a struggle. I think it's a whole issue with RCR across the board currently at the moment, and people coming in isn't going to fix the issues. I think for Austin Dillon, it's not going to be a good year for him in 2026. The driver finishing 30th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is the driver of the 47 car for Hayek Motorsports, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Now, in the first half of 2025, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. impressed me and had some really decent runs and had good consistency. Unfortunate second half of the year, it was a really frustrating year. He only had maybe 1 or 2 top 10s in the final half of the year and ran in the middle to back of the pack most of the year. I think unfortunately the same thing that happened at the end of 2025 is going to continue in 2026. Now, I think he'll have a really good chance to win super speedways more than likely, but outside of that, I think this 47 team just isn't going to be there. There's been a lot of rumors that Stenhouse could also leave this team at the end of 2026, could eventually go to Spire Motorsports down the road. And I think because of that, it's just not going to be the best year for Stenhouse. I think Stenhouse is a better driver than some people give him credit for, but I think it's going to unfortunately be a struggle for Stenhouse. Sadly, I don't think it run really well in 2026. The driver finishing 29th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver to 7 car for Spire Motorsports, Daniel Suarez. I think for the first time since 2022 or 2023, the 7 car is going to be back in the top 30 in the points. I think Suarez is going to do better than what Justin Haley and Corey LaJoie have done. But that's not saying much. Now, obviously, there's a lot of rumors that Chris Gabehart is likely coming over to Spire Motorsports in 2026 with him departing Joe Gibbs Racing. But I don't really think he's going to be able to fully help Daniel Suarez get to that next big level. The 7 car has been the weak link of this team the last couple of years. And while I think Suarez will have a chance to win road courses, which is why I have him in the top 30s, I think he'll be a factor of road courses throughout the year. I think he could be a factor of super speedways also, maybe a couple occasional great runs. I think there's potential for Suarez to be good, but he might be a free agent also at the end of 2026, depending on how things go. So I think it's just not going to be the best year for Suarez. I do think he finishes in the top 30, but I think there's going to be a lot of times this year where that car is not up to speed. It could be a struggle for Suarez at points in 2026. The driver finishing 28th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver to 42 car for Legacy Motor Club, John Hunter Nemechek. John Hunter Nemechek had some pretty good runs in 2025 and occasionally was a pretty big factor at super speedways and even had some good runs at road courses also in the 2025 year. I think John Hunter is going to regress just a little bit from what he did in 2025. Not to the point where I think he's going to be as bad as he was in like 2024, where the rumors he was going to be let go potentially at the end of that year. But I think Nemechek is going to have some okay runs throughout the year. I think he'll be a factor at super speedways throughout the year. Might have some occasional good runs at tracks like Darlington, for example, and Las Vegas, for example. But I think he's going to be a little bit behind his teammate Eric Jones throughout the year. I think he'll be fine. He just won't do great. I think he finishes in the bottom half of the standings this year, though, in 2026. The driver finishing 27th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver to 16 car for Kaulig Racing, AJ Allmendinger. Like I mentioned with Ty Dillon, Kaulig Racing no longer has the support from ECR going into 2026. And because of that, I think AJ Allmendinger is going to go from a driver who's been a playoff threat and a contender to being a driver that's going to be running in the middle to potentially back of the pack. Now, I do expect the middle field to be very, very close, so you can have some decent runs. I might be able to have 5 or 6 top 10s, but still finish in the back half of the field. And I think because of that and not having a support next year, it is going to be a struggle, I think, for AJ to be a factor. He also struggled on road courses in 2025 as well compared to prior years. So I think AJ is going to have some not so great runs in 2026. Maybe will prove me wrong and get a victory, but with the winning year and likely not maybe existing the way it has been, I think AJ won't be as strong and may have not as many good runs in 2026. The driver finishing 26th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver to 34 car for Farmer Motorsports, Todd Gillen. I think Todd Gilliland is going to improve from what he did in 2025. For the most part, it was a down year for Todd Gilliland compared to what he did in 2024, where he had a good chance to be a top 20 guy. And I thought that would be the case in 2025. That really wasn't the case. I think Gilliland is going to do a little bit better. I don't think he's going to set the world on fire, but I think he's going to have a much better season. I think his and Chris Lawson's chemistry is going to be much better this year, and I think that's going to lead to Todd Gilliland having his best season since 2024 in one of his better years. He's going to start having a rise once again, put together some good runs, be a factor at super speedways, maybe have a couple occasional good runs. I think the support from Penske is going to grow. I think we'll have a pretty solid year and do a decent job in Cup in 2026. The driver finishing 25th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver to 38 car for Farmer Motorsports, Zane Smith. I expect Zane Smith to be the strongest Farmer Motorsports driver in 2026 like he was in 2025. But I don't think Zane Smith is going to absolutely go out there and be a major factor outside of a couple races. Now, I think he's one of the few guys that could surprise and pop up and have some good runs. He could be a factor a mile and a half. So we saw what he did at Kansas before he unfortunately flipped upside down in 2025. And I think there's a potential you could see Zane Smith do at least some good stuff this upcoming year. I could see him being a factor at super speedways, could see him being a factor at mile and a half and even short tracks throughout the year. I think there's some good things coming around from the 38 team. I think it will be a solid enough year. I think that Zane Smith will put together a pretty decent season and show some good things with the Farmer Motorsports team in that 38 car once again in 2026. The driver finishing 24th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver of the 43 car for Legacy Motor Club, Eric Jones. Now, going into 2026, Eric Jones is going to be in a contract year with Legacy. And I kind of expect him to run kind of very similar to what he did in 2025. I don't think Legacy Motor Club is going to take that big step forward like they did from 2024 to 2025. I think there's going to be some small steps forward, but I think Eric Jones could surprise a lot of people. I could see Eric Jones being a factor in the Southern 500. He could be a factor in both Darlington races. Remember how fast he was at Phoenix in 2024? I could see that being a good track for Legacy Motor Club as well. I think Eric Jones is going to have some good runs throughout the year. I just think that middle pack is going to be strong. I think the points are going to be really close. And because of that, I think Eric Jones is going to be in that middle pack range in 2026. We'll see where things go for Jones, but I think Eric Jones will be in the middle pack-ish and finish 24th in the Cup standings. The driver finishing 23rd in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver to 71 car for Spire Motorsports, Michael McDowell. Michael McDowell, I think, ran around this in the standings in 2025, but I don't really expect him to do much better in 2026. He had some good runs at road courses in 2025, and I think that's where his strength is going to be on the road courses this year, where I think he'll be a factor for top 5s and top 10s. I also do think that he'll be a factor at super speedways. You never know, might get a couple poles like he did in 2025. I still think Spire Motorsports is about a year or two away from really jumping up to that next level, but I think there's a potential for McDowell to come in and potentially steal a win again, another victory, maybe at a super speedway or road course potentially. Who knows at this point? I think it'll be a solid year, but not a spectacular, but I think he runs around 23rd in 2026. The driver finishing 22nd in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver of the 21 car for the Wood brothers, Josh Berry. I think Josh Berry is going to have one of the bigger falls of full-time drivers in the standings from 2025 to 2026. Outside of the win in Las Vegas and a couple good runs at tracks like Richmond and Phoenix, he really didn't run amazing throughout the year in 2025, but he did do better than Harrison Burton had done. I think he's going to kind of regress a little bit from what he did in 2025, but I think there's a chance for consistency. The reason he finished that high up in the points is because when you're in, and he got that win in Vegas early in the season. I think Vegas could be a really good track for him down the road. I think some of the short tracks he's going to be a factor, like North Wilkesboro, for example. I think he'll have some good runs throughout the year. I just don't think he'll be a major contender for the title in any way, shape, or form. I think there's some good things that Josh Berry can have. I just don't expect major things to go that direction. I think he'll be in the middle of the pack a lot of times. Maybe good in New Hampshire. Also, that could be a track I could circle for Josh Berry to be good. But I think a lot of the year he's going to be running around that 20th to 15th range, which is not that bad, but it's not spectacular either. The driver finishing 21st in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver to 2 car for Team Penske, Austin Cindric. I gotta be honest about Austin Cindric. Back in 2021, I was really high on Austin Cindric. I thought Cindric was going to come into Cup and be a major contender. And yes, he did run a little better than where he finished in the standings under a full season thing, but it wasn't a great year for Cindric. And unfortunately, I expect that to continue in 2026. I don't see Cindric really making those big steps forward. And I don't think he's going to win a race like Talladega to have an opportunity to do that. I think Cindric's going to be running in the middle of the pack more than likely a lot of times. I think he's still going to be pretty far behind both his teammates, Joe Logano, Ryan Blaney, who both I think will have pretty good years in Cup in 2026. I know Penske's been hit or miss at points, but I think Cindric's going to have some struggles this upcoming year. I think he could be a factor at Super Speedways. That's pretty much about it at this point. I think Dink will do some good stuff there, but outside of some of the Super Speedways, I think he just won't be a major factor because he struggled on road courses a little bit in the last couple of years. The driver finishing 20th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver 88 car for Trackhouse Racing, Connor Zilisch. Connor Zilisch is going to be the only rookie in NASCAR Cup competition in 2026 on a full-time basis. But I think Connor Zilisch is going to impress people throughout the year. Now, there's a lot of people I've seen that say that Connor is going to win 4 to 5 races this year. I think the expectations there are a little too high. I think there's going to be a lot of times this year where Connor is going to be running in the middle to potentially back of the pack. But as the year progressing goes on, I expect Connor Zilisch to be a major contender by the end of the year. I just think the beginning of the year struggles are going to be something that's going to hurt him and hinder him a little bit. But I think he wins a race before the end of the year. I think he's going to have a solid but not spectacular year, but that's what a rookie should do. Just don't really cause any issues and trouble. I think he has kind of a similar season to Kyle Busch in ways like his rookie year back in 2005. I think Zilisch will have a solid year and get a win for sure in 2026. The driver finishing 19th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver with a 54 car for Joe Gibbs Racing, Ty Gibbs. I really don't know what to make about Ty Gibbs at this point going to next year because in 2025, I predicted that Gibbs is going to be a top 12 to top 13 driver by how he ran in the beginning of the year. But then 2025 through the first half of the season, it really was a big struggle outside of a couple good runs on road courses like Sonoma and Chicago, for example, and Mexico. I think Ty Gibbs will have a good chance to be good at the road courses. He was one of the few guys that keep up at times with Shane Van Gisbergen throughout the year, and I could see him being really good at Bristol. But outside of that, there's some big questions around his team. Obviously, Chris Gabehart, we know, will not be back with his team, and I do think that Gibbs will regress just a little bit across the board in 2026 because of that, and Gibbs will be the one that likely is the most effective. I think it'll be a hit-or-miss season for Ty Gibbs in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2026. The driver finishing 18th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver of the A car for Richard Childress Racing, Kyle Busch. I think Kyle Busch will do some good things with Jim Pullman this year, and I think Busch will have a little better year in 2026 than he had in 2025. But that is not saying much at this point because I don't think Jim Pullman is going to be the full-on savior that some people are expecting because I don't think it's a Jim Pullman issue. I think it's an RCR issue at this point. And Kyle Busch, yes, I think he does want to race most likely to Super Speedway, but a lot of times this year, I think he's going to be running in the middle to the pack. I think there's going to be some good pop-up runs. He has some good runs at the end of 2025, albeit, but I think it's just going to be a hit-or-miss season for Busch. Obviously, he's going to be in a contract year with RCR in 2026. Wouldn't be surprised if this is the last year RCR potentially ends up at Spire. Down the road could be teammates with a guy we'll talk about in just a little bit. But I think Busch does get a win, but I think it'll be a very much hit-or-miss season for him in 2026. The driver finishing 17th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver to 77 car for Aspire Motorsports, Carson Hocevar. I think Carson Hocevar is going to end up kind of ranking close to where I ranked him in 2025. I think he's going to be a little more consistent than what he was in 2025 because he had a lot of raw speed and he has a lot of raw potential and talent, but he had a lot of DNS. But a lot of DNS this year were not his over-aggressiveness. He had 5 DNS in 2025 based off mechanical failures. You take those 5 DNS away, he's up in the top 16 in the standings. I think he's going to be pretty good this upcoming season. I think he's going to show some really good brilliance, and I think he's going to have some good flash of brilliance. Would not surprise if he does get a win before the end of the year. I just think there's going to be some issues with the consistency of points as well, but I think he'll be more consistent and do a little better in 2026 than he did in 2025 on that front. The driver finishing 16th in the NASCAR Cup standings in 2026 is a driver to 60 car for RFK Racing, Ryan Preece. Ryan Preece had a pretty good year in NASCAR Cup competition in 2025. He had a career year in the series, had 3 top 5s, 14 top 10s. I expect a lot of similar things in 2026 that he had in 2025. I wouldn't be entirely shocked if Ryan Preece does end up getting a victory this year, because I think he's going to be really good at the short tracks, and I think there'll be some improvement in consistency in some areas. I just think that the top 15 ahead of him are a little better than him currently at the moment, but I think it's going to be a solid year. I think consistency is going to matter a little bit more on that front, so I think it helps a guy like Ryan Preece. He's a really consistent guy. Didn't have a lot of DNFs in 2025 like he's had in prior years with SHR and other teams, but I think his time with RFK is going to be looking pretty good. I think we'll have a solid year, and I think he finishes in the top 16 in points in 2026. The driver finishing 15th in the NASCAR Cup standings in 2026 is the driver of the 6th car for RFK Racing, Brad Keselowski. I think 2026 for Brad is going to be much better than it was in 2025. The first half of the year for Brad, they moved a lot of people around to help that 60 car, and he lost a lot of good forces on that team, and that's where the 16 struggled in the beginning of the year. But if you notice in the second half of the year, that 6 car almost won a few races. He had a fast car at Iowa, had a fast car at Phoenix, could have won a couple other races throughout the year. And I think the 6th team is going to be a team that will have a pretty big bounce back season. I also think there's a good chance Brad Keselowski will win a race in 2026. I think it's going to be the best season Brad's had in a few years. He can almost have a better year, in my opinion, than he did in 2024, where he got a win at Darlington. I think it'll be a solid year for Brad. I think he'll show some good things this year and show why he so deserves to be in the sport. This also could be Brad's final year in Cup, depending on what happens to the charter stuff. Who knows? But I think Brad Keselowski will have a solid year in 2026. The driver finishing 14th in the NASCAR Cup standings in 2026 is a driver of the 97 car for Trackhouse Racing, Shane Van Gisbergen. This one is going to be a little bit of hot take that I have in this high up, but hear me out. Shane Van Gisbergen, we know, is going to be a major factor on road courses. I think he's going to win majority of the road courses in 2026, which is going to help him a lot in the standings. But his oval numbers, he got better throughout the year. He had top 10, top 15 speed on pretty much every single oval outside of Phoenix. He was really good at Vegas, really good at other tracks like Kansas, where he got a top 10. And I think his oval speed is only going to continue to improve. So because of that, I think he's going to be a consistent top 15, top 20 threat on a week-by-week basis on the ovals. And you never know, he could get that first oval win before the end of the year. I'm not entirely expecting that for SVG at this point, but I do think Shane Van Gisbergen is going to have a solid year in NASCAR Cup competition, have a solid sophomore year, get multiple victories, and I think he'll be a top 15 guy in points in 2026. The driver finishing 13th in the NASCAR Cup standings in 2026 is a driver of the 48 car for Hendrick Motorsports, Alex Bowman. Just like it's been the last couple years, I do expect Alex Bowman to continue being the likely weak link at Hendrick Motorsports. And it will be a big contract year for Alex Bowman and Hendrick, but I don't think Alex Bowman is going to suck. I think Alex Bowman is just going to be fine, because I think the field is going to be really close together, and I think Bowman could pop up and get a win. In fact, I think Bowman will win a race at some point before the end of the year, which will let him keep his seat at Hendrick Motorsports down the road, which, let's be real, I think he deserves to be in that 48 car long term. I think he'll have some good runs. I think he'll be a top 10 guy in points throughout the year. I just think you got to kind of worry about the consistency. He hasn't really been the most consistent guy since probably around 2021 and 2020, where he was extremely consistent. So I think that consistency is something he's got to work on at this point. I think he'll have a solid year, but I don't think it'll be a spectacular one. But I think Bowman will be a decent driver and have a good, solid year in 2026. The driver finishing 12th in the NASCAR Cup standings in 2026 is a driver 17 car for RFK Racing, Chris Buescher. I expect Chris Buescher to be the strongest RFK Racing driver in 2026. He has been the strongest RFK Racing driver since 2023 and even 2022. 2023, of course, he picked up 3 wins. And 2025, despite the fact he didn't even make the playoffs, he had one of the best average finishes in the field. With consistency mattering quite a bit, I think that Buescher is going to be more of a factor this year. Wouldn't surprise me if he had points. He's a top 5 and top 10 threat in the standings. But I think he's going to fall a little bit back as the season goes on, because teams like Hendrick and Gibbs and Penske are going to probably take over the top teams as the season goes on. And I think there's another team that also will be looking good throughout the year. I think Buescher is going to have a solid year. I think there's a good chance he gets back to victory lane. Also, I think Buescher is going to put together some really strong and good numbers. I think for Chris Buescher, it will be a pretty good year for him at RFK Racing in 2026. The driver finishing 11th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver of the 1 car for Trackhouse Racing, Ross Chastain. I think Ross Chastain is going to have a better year in 2026 than he did in 2025. 2025 was pretty much a hit or miss season for this one car. He was really good early in the year, but there's a lot of qualifying issues throughout the year. He got that win at the Coke 600 and had only a few finishes inside the top 10 throughout the remainder of the year. He's going to have a really big addition coming in, and that is going to be Brandon McSwain. Now, I think it's going to take some time for that chemistry to really work together, but I think Brandon McSwain is a really good engineer. He's won some races in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series of Hendrick Motorsports, comes from that program. So I think that's going to be a major asset for Ross Chastain, to where Ross will probably have his best season in Cup since around 2023 at this point, because 2023 was a pretty good year. I think he's going to be a top 10 threat a lot of times throughout the year in the standings. He could be an outside contender for the championship this year. I think he'll be the strongest team that is not associated with Joe Gibbs Racing, Hendrick, or Penske at this point. I think he's going to have a pretty good season. I think Ross Chastain will put together some solid numbers in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026. The driver finishing 10th in the NASCAR Cup standings in 2026 is a driver 23 car for 2311 Racing, Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace had a really good year in 2025 for his standards. He had about 6 or 7 top 5s, picked up the win in the Brickyard 400, and had 14 or 15 top 10s, had a record year across the board outside of maybe the average finish, where he probably could have had a couple other good finishes and not for bad luck, like Richmond, for example. I expect a lot of the same good things to come for Bubba Wallace in 2026. I think Bubba is going to be in a contention potentially for a championship this year, and he had a championship caliber car at points in 2025. I think he's going to put together one of the best seasons he's ever had in his Cup career, and I think it's very likely for the first time in Bubba's career, he is going to have multiple wins in a season. This 23 team's only getting stronger at this point, and every year this team continues to get stronger. They get speed every single year, it seems like, earlier, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's in that conversation for the title at some point. I think he will be a factor, and I think 2011 Racing is going to bring some good speed for Bubba in 2026. The driver finishing 9th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver of the 45 car for 2311 Racing, Tyler Reddick. I think Tyler Reddick is going to be the strongest on Joe Gibbs Racing, Penske, or Hendrick driver in 2026. I expect Reddick to have a pretty solid year in NASCAR Cup competition. I think not only will the consistency return in some way, shape, or form for Tyler Reddick, but I also think he's going to get back to victory lane. He did not pick up a victory in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2025. I think that is going to change in 2026, because I think 2011 Racing, even with some of the adversity, with the loss of going on Michael Jordan, all that stuff that's been happening, we talk about on the channel, I think that's not going to really distract Tyler Reddick at this point. So I think Reddick is going to put together a pretty solid year in the NASCAR Cup Series, and I think the 45 team will be looking pretty strong and really good throughout this season. So I expect Reddick to have a much better year. I look for the 45 team to be up front quite a bit, contending for wins on intermediate tracks, potentially could sweep at a track like Vegas or Kansas, for example, and could be a factor at Texas, and he could also show up at a super speedway. Who knows, but I think Reddick will be a pretty good factor in 2026. The driver finishing 8th in the NASCAR Cup standings in 2026 is a driver 22 car for Team Penske, Joey Logano. I think Joey Logano is going to have a much better season in 2026. In fact, I think he'll have his best overall season across the board since when he won his second championship in 2022. Because 2024, he wasn't really that great when he won the championship, but he ended up winning the title that year. And 2025 wasn't a great season, but he did have a better year in 2025 than he did in 24. I think Logano's going to have a much more consistent season. I think the 22 team, we know there's a chance that consistency could matter a little bit more. I think this team will focus a little bit more on that. But I still think this team is a little bit behind currently at the moment. I don't think they're going to have the same strength they had in like 2015 or 2016 or anything like that. But Logano, I still think, will have a pretty solid year. I think he gets back to victory lane a couple times potentially. I think he has his best year in quite some time and put together a pretty solid year in Cup. The driver finishing 7th in the NASCAR Cup standings in 2026 is a driver of the 19 car for Joe Gibbs Racing, Chase Briscoe. I think Chase Briscoe is going to regress a little bit from the numbers that he had in 2025, where Briscoe picked up 3 wins and made the championship 4. I think Briscoe and this team are going to be solid. I think Briscoe will still get multiple victories in Cup. I still think he'll win at least 2 races this year, but I don't think he's going to have as many wins as he did in 2025, and I think the departure of Chris Gabehart is going to affect the team across the board as a whole, because Chris Gabehart being there really helped this team in a really massive and really big way. But still, I think James Small and Chase Briscoe's chemistry and relationship seems to be really good, and I think that's really going to help Chase Briscoe in a really big way in 2026. So I expect Briscoe to still have a pretty good season. I think consistency is one thing to watch for at this point. That could be a thing that could be a strength of Briscoe, considering how consistent he was at the end of 2025. I think Briscoe is going to have a solid year and finish in the top 10 in points in 2026. The driver finishing 6th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is the driver of the 11 car for Joe Gibbs Racing, Denny Hamlin. I think Denny Hamlin is going to regress just a little bit in the NASCAR Cup Series in standings in 2026. I think some of the age factor is going to start coming into play in 26, but not too much, because I still expect Denny Hamlin to get multiple victories. But I really don't think Denny Hamlin is going to be a major championship contender throughout the season. There's a lot of things distracting him at this point. The lawsuit stuff that's still going on currently at the moment that could even go into 2026 and 2027. And obviously, of course, unknowns of what's going on the other side of things too. But I think Hamlin still will have a fast car throughout the year. I think he's not going to regress insanely amount. I just don't think he'll be in that top 5 conversation. I think, again, he still gets a couple wins, but I don't think he'll be fully in the top 5 conversation throughout the season. I think there's going to be times where this 11 car won't be extremely the quickest car out there, and I think it could affect Hamlin, but I still think Hamlin will have a solid year, but not a spectacular year in NASCAR Cup competition in 2026. The driver finishing 5th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is a driver of the 20 car for Joe Gibbs Racing, Christopher Bell. Christopher Bell, I think, will be the strongest Joe Gibbs Racing driver in 2026. He is going to be looking for vengeance and looking to finally win that NASCAR Cup title. He's been with Joe Gibbs Racing now, and this will be his 6th year with the team, and he wants to finally get that championship after being there for the last couple years. And I feel like this 20 team is a sleeping giant at this point. It looked like they were going to be the favorite for the title early in the season after winning 3 of the first 4 races, and they kind of were inconsistent until they got that win at Bristol. I think that Christopher Bell will be pretty consistent throughout the season, and I think Brett Bell will be a guy winning multiple races. I think I have Bell winning 2 or 3 races this season. I think his consistency is going to be good. I just don't know if he'll reach the top 2 or top 3 level. Again, I mentioned this with Joe Gibbs Racing. I expect the team to struggle a little bit across the board in 2026, but I still think Bell will be a solid factor, and I think he'll put together a solid enough and a pretty good season with the Joe Gibbs Racing team and organization. I think he will be a contender for the title in 2026. The driver finishing 4th in the NASCAR Cup Series standings in 2026 is the driver of the 9 car for Hendrick Motorsports, Chase Elliott. I think Chase Elliott across the board on wins and consistency, I think Chase Elliott is going to have his best year in the NASCAR Cup Series since 2022 when he picked up 5 victories. And I don't think he's going to win 5 races, but I think 2 to 3 wins for Chase Elliott is going to be there. I also think that consistency factor, which I think with the new format they're going to have, I think consistency is going to matter a lot more. I think that's going to be a strength for Chase Elliott, because if we're going by consistency, this 9 team has been one of the most consistent teams over the last couple of years. They just haven't won as many races. But I think with consistency being a more important thing and winning still going to matter a little bit also, I think this 9 team will be pretty strong. I think Chase will put together one of his best seasons in a very long time. I think the old Chase Elliott is going to come back in some way, shape, or form. I think he puts together a pretty good year in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2026. And I think Elliott and this 9 team are going to be looking good. I don't think there'll be any questions about this program. I think Chase Elliott will be a pretty big factor and a pretty strong contender to put together a solid enough season with the Hendrick Motorsports team. I think it'll be a good year for him in 2026 with Hendrick. The driver finishing 3rd in the NASCAR Cup standings in 2026 is a driver of the 24 car for Hendrick Motorsports, William Byron. I think William Byron is going to be, once again, like he's been the last couple of years, in the championship conversation. And I think William Byron is going to start being more of an aggressive driver in 2026 than he's been in 2025. And there have been times where that 24 car has also been consistent, but they've also been a little aggressive on the racetrack as well and not been as clean. I think that aggression is going to start picking up for Byron, and Byron, especially going into age 30 season around that point, I think he's going to want to finally get that first title. I think he's just going to miss out on the championship in 2026, and I think Byron's going to win around the same amount of races as he did in 2025, where he won 2 or 3 races. I think he's going to kind of be in that same general range in 2026, but I think that it's going to be a pretty fun year if you're a William Byron fan. I don't think he'll get his 3rd Daytona 500 win in a row, unfortunately. We haven't seen that ever done before, so I think Byron will be a pretty big contender. I think it'll be a good year for Byron, and I think he'll be a major factor for the championship in 2026. The driver finishing in 2nd place, aka the runner-up position in 2026 in the standings, is a driver of the 12 car for Team Penske, Ryan Blaney. I think Ryan Blaney is going to be a championship contender this upcoming season. If you look at Ryan Blaney in 2025, if you take away all the DNS, he was arguably the fastest guy in the field a lot of weeks, and he probably should have won more than 3 races in 2025. I think that this 12 team is going to be one of the strongest teams and one of the teams they're going to have to be throughout the 2026 season. I think he will win at least 3. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a 4 to 5 win season, and this could be one of the strongest years we see from Ryan Blaney across the board. If that consistency is the only thing that hinders him, that might be the one reason why I don't have him number 1, because I do think Ryan Blaney and this team are going to be in the conversation all season long. I think that this team is going to be fast all year. He's without question right now the best Penske driver. He and Jonathan Hasler's chemistry is absolutely incredible currently at the moment. I think he put together a really strong year with this team and organization, and I expect Ryan Blaney to be a major factor, and I think he for sure will be a major contender for the championship in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2026. Which means that the driver have winning and finishing the highest in the NASCAR Cup Series championship standings in 2026 is the driver of the 5 car for Hendrick Motorsports, Kyle Larson. I think for the first time since Jimmy Johnson went 5 in a row in the NASCAR Cup Series from 2006 to 2010, I think we're going to have our first back-to-back champion in 16 years. I think Kyle Larson, you have to look at a lot of reasons why I'm picking Larson. Number 1, I think Kyle Larson is going to be coming back to play. I think he's going to win a lot of races this upcoming season, at least 4 to 5 races in 2026. I think he's also going to be a more consistent driver. People talk about how Kyle Larson's extremely inconsistent. I kind of disagree with that at this point. I think Larson's been starting to be a lot more of a consistent driver at this point in the NASCAR Cup Series. And I think in addition to that, you look at a track like Homestead. If we do have the single race, which I don't think we're going to have the single race championship, I think that he absolutely, without question, will be a major contender for that at Homestead because he's good at that track. But I think he's also good at many other tracks in the field. He's gotten better at super speedways. He's becoming a more complete driver. And yes, I know it's been nearly a year since Larson got his last win. But I do think Larson is going to be a major factor and a considerable championship threat this season. I expect the 5 team to be really, really good this year. I think Larson will be the guy that gets it done. I'm going to go with Kyle Larson to be your driver that will win the NASCAR Cup Series title and championship in 2026. So, that is going to be the ranking video where I think every NASCAR Cup Series driver will finish in the standings in 2026. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go some more of that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. We're going to rank all the drivers in the Cup Series standings for 2026. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and who you think likely ends up being the champion at the end of the season. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Tomorrow on the channel, I'll be doing an early dive look at the 2026 NASCAR Cup Series driver lineup, going through everything that's been confirmed and unconfirmed at this point. If there's a lot of NASCAR news, we'll talk about it on the channel also on Monday. Probably more updates on the lawsuit as well, the 25th front row lawsuit. Then, of course, on Tuesday, there should be a long NASCAR news video dropping on the channel, talking about everything from all the way back to Wednesday or Friday, all the way, of course, to the day of Tuesday or Wednesday. And there's going to be a lot of news videos throughout the week and probably days of coverage of the trial. We got a lot of other content dropping in RFK preview. There will be a silly season update dropping also in the not so distant future as well, right before Chris's and O'Reilly Auto Parts Series prediction should be coming in the coming days and weeks. We got content coming on people like Haley Deegan, Shane Van Gisbergen, Carl Edwards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Ballas, Ross Chastain, Sheldon Creed, Sam Mayer, Frankie Muniz, Cletus Savon, Dodge, Ram, Brad Keselowski, Tony Stewart, Casey Kane, Will Brown, Brad Feeney, Cam Waters, Connor Zillis, Junior Motorsports, Daniel Suarez, Red Bull, all the good stuff we'll talk about on the channel in the coming days and the coming weeks as well. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content, other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, buddy.